It started as a bold challenge. Donald Trump confident and ready to dominate the stage. But within minutes, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett flipped the entire room with nothing but calm precision and the truth. By the third question, Trump wasn't just losing the debate. He was looking for a way out. The lights were blinding, the cameras were rolling, and the air inside the auditorium felt electric. This wasn't your usual political forum. It was a powder keg waiting for a spark. And that spark came the moment Donald Trump leaned into the microphone, pointed across the stage, and said the words that froze the room. "You want a real debate? Let's go." The audience gasped, caught between shock and anticipation. There were murmurs, chairs shifted, and all eyes turned toward the woman he had just challenged. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, wearing a crisp navy blazer and an expression of sharp calm, Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't glance toward the moderators or look to her team for guidance. She met Trump's stare and, with a steady voice that cut through the tension, answered, "I was born ready." The crowd stirred again, this time with something that felt closer to awe. A moment earlier, this had been a structured event, another panel discussion filled with sound bites and rehearsed lines. But now it had transformed into something no one had expected. A live, unscripted clash between two political forces who couldn't be more different. Trump had been in his usual form all evening, commanding the room with his trademark bravado, peppering his answers with sharp jabs and controlling the tempo like a showman. But he had clearly underestimated who was sitting across from him. Crockett hadn't spoken much up to that point. She listened. She calculated. And when the moment came, she didn't just rise to it, she owned it. The moderators looked uncertain. This wasn't part of the schedule. There were no rules for what was happening. But with the audience buzzing and cameras capturing every second, they knew better than to intervene. This was no longer their show. Trump sat up straighter in his chair. He believed he'd put her on the spot. In his mind, he was setting the stage to show dominance. Classic strategy. But Crockett wasn't rattled. She leaned back, crossed her legs, and waited for the first real question. And in that pause, those few seconds of silence, you could feel the shift. This wasn't the first time someone tried to throw Crockett off balance. As a former public defender, she'd faced tougher opponents in rougher settings. She wasn't a stranger to heat. In fact, she thrived in it. Trump, meanwhile, was performing for the room. That's what he knew best. Create a moment, seize attention, deliver a punchline. But this wasn't a rally. This wasn't a crowd built only to cheer him on. It was a mixed audience, curious, skeptical, and ready to listen to whoever could prove they had something real to say. And Crockett was ready. The moderator, still slightly stunned, regained composure and leaned forward. "All right," he said cautiously. "If both candidates agree, we'll proceed. A direct debate. First question coming up." There it was, official. Trump had opened a door and Crockett had walked right through it. But this wasn't just political theater anymore. This was a real-time battle of ideas, experience, and clarity. One side brought years of spotlight and spectacle. The other brought truth born from the ground up, from the courtrooms, from neighborhoods overlooked, from people who felt forgotten. The tension on stage was thick. Trump adjusted his cufflinks and scanned the crowd like he always did, looking for energy to ride. Crockett didn't move. She wasn't looking for energy. She already had it. This wasn't just a clash of parties or policies. It was a confrontation between two entirely different visions of leadership and the audience. They were leaning in, not because someone yelled louder, but because for the first time that night they sensed something unpredictable, something raw, something real. Trump may have thrown the first punch with his challenge, but everyone in the room would soon learn Crockett wasn't there to spar. She was there to make a point, and she wasn't going to miss. The first question dropped like a hammer, echoing through the charged silence that had followed Trump's onstage challenge. What does it truly mean to fight for the American people? It was simple in wording, but heavy in implication. This wasn't a question about numbers or budgets. It was a test of heart, experience, and authenticity. A real answer couldn't be memorized. It had to be felt. Trump went first. He leaned forward, planting his elbows on the table like a seasoned performer stepping into the spotlight. "Nobody," he said with a smirk, "has fought harder for the American people than me." I brought jobs back. I secured the border. I lowered taxes. I told the world we were done being taken advantage of." He paused for effect, letting the crowd absorb each point like a list of battle victories. "I didn't sit in back rooms and write policy papers. I went out and did it. I fought the media. I fought the bureaucrats. I fought for you." Some heads in the crowd nodded. The tone was familiar, strong, assertive, absolute. This was the Trump people had come to expect, full of confidence, sure of his legacy. He sat back satisfied. Then the room turned to Jasmine Crockett. She didn't rush. She didn't adjust her mic or strike a pose. She simply sat upright, let a breath out, and began to speak in a calm, steady voice. "Fighting for the people means showing up when no one's watching," she said. "It means being there when the cameras aren't rolling. Not to take credit, but to take responsibility." The room quieted. She wasn't speaking in slogans. She was speaking in experience. "I grew up in a neighborhood where politicians came by only when it was time to ask for votes. They'd smile, take pictures, then disappear. I remember watching my mom take double shifts at a hospital just to keep the lights on. I remember classmates who were smarter than me but never made it because they didn't get the same chances. That's what shaped me." Her voice didn't waver. It didn't need to. "Before I ever sat in Congress, I was a public defender. I wasn't making big speeches. I was in courtrooms every day trying to keep young black men from disappearing into a system that never saw their humanity." She glanced toward Trump briefly. "You say you fought for the people, but you fought from the top. I've been fighting from the bottom." That sentence landed hard. There was a beat of silence. Not the kind that comes from boredom or confusion, but the kind that follows something true. Trump shifted in his seat. His usual retorts, the fast comebacks and crowd pleasers, none of them seemed to fit because this wasn't a personal attack. Crockett hadn't insulted him. She had simply drawn a line and made it clear where she stood. For some folks, she continued, fighting for the people means writing executive orders. For me, it meant sitting across from a scared teenager and telling him I'd fight like hell to keep him out of prison for something he didn't do. And not just once every single day. She leaned back, her hands folded in front of her. You don't get to call yourself a fighter because you shouted the loudest. You earn that title by showing up even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. The audience didn't erupt in applause. They didn't cheer wildly. They just watched, processing, taking it in. Because in that moment, Jasmine Crockett wasn't just answering a debate question. She was showing them who she was. Trump opened his mouth as if to respond, but then stopped. There was nothing to interrupt, no insult to refute. Only the weight of real life, something not even his years in the spotlight could counter. The moderator, trying to stay composed, thanked both speakers and moved to the next question. But something had already shifted. Trump may have been the one to throw down the challenge. But Crockett had answered it in a way he hadn't expected. Not with fire, but with facts. Not with rage, but with reality. She didn't outshout him. She outgrounded him. And everyone watching, whether they agreed or not, could feel it. The moderator didn't waste time. Sensing that the debate had taken on a life of its own, he pushed forward with the next question, this time with a sharper edge. Can you describe a moment when your integrity was truly tested under pressure with real consequences on the line? It was the kind of question that could corner a politician or reveal their core, one that couldn't be spun with buzzwords. You had to answer it with something real or risk sounding empty. Trump went first again. He squared his shoulders and spoke with the force of someone who had been in many storms. There were a lot of moments, believe me, he began, but one of the biggest was during the investigations thrown at me. Witch hunts, total scams designed to destroy me politically, financially, personally. He gestured with open hands, palms to the crowd. Most people would have folded. They'd have said, forget it. This is too much? But I didn't. I stood tall because I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. I kept going. That's integrity, not running when it gets hard. He looked out over the crowd, expecting the applause that usually followed such declarations. There were claps, scattered and polite, but not the wave he was used to. The audience was listening, but they were no longer just reacting. They were measuring. Now it was Jasmine Crockett's turn. She didn't start right away. She let a pause linger just long enough to make the room feel the weight of the question. Then she leaned forward. "My integrity was tested before I ever got to Washington," she said quietly. "I was a young lawyer, fresh out of law school, working as a public defender. I had a client, 17 years old, accused of armed robbery. The evidence was flimsy. A single eyewitness who later admitted they couldn't clearly see anything. But the prosecution wanted a win." She drew in a breath. You could tell this wasn't just a story. It was a memory. They offered a deal. 10 years if he pleaded guilty. If he went to trial and lost, he'd get 30. He begged me to tell him what to do. Her voice dropped barely above a whisper. I looked at him. I saw a kid who never had a chance. A kid scared out of his mind. And I told him the truth. If you didn't do it, we're going to fight it, no matter what it costs. There wasn't a sound in the auditorium, not even a cough. I knew I might lose that case. I knew I'd be blamed if it went badly. But integrity means standing with people when they have no one else. Not because it's easy, not because it makes you look good, but because it's the right thing. She paused, letting her words sink in. We went to trial and we won. He walked out of that courtroom free, and he still sends me messages to this day just to say thank you. She leaned back, letting the story settle. That's integrity under pressure, she finished. Not because someone's watching, not because your name's on a building, but because someone's life is in your hands. The impact was immediate and undeniable. Trump, usually quick to retake control, remained still. It wasn't that he didn't have something to say. It was that Crockett's answer wasn't political. It was personal, unrehearsed, unfiltered. You can't argue with a lived moment like that. You can only listen. And the audience was doing exactly that. Even those who came expecting fireworks were struck by something deeper. Vulnerability paired with strength. Crockett hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't insulted anyone. But she had shifted the room again just by being real. Trump tried to regain footing. I admire that story, he said with a forced smile. But being president is a lot bigger than one case. We're talking about countries, armies, trillions of dollars. That's real pressure. Crockett nodded. And if you don't know what it feels like to have one person's life depend on your decision, she replied, how can you carry the weight of millions? It wasn't a zinger. It was a warning. And this time, Trump didn't respond. It was the third question. And though no one knew it at the time, this would be the moment Donald Trump's confidence finally cracked. The moderator, now fully aware of the stakes, didn't ease up. He leaned forward and read the next prompt carefully. What would you say to a working-class family struggling to make ends meet, one that doesn't trust either political party anymore? It was a question wrapped in disillusionment. No statistics, no charts, just a plea for honesty. Trump, perhaps sensing he needed to regain ground, jumped in before the moderator even finished. I'd say this, he began, pointing at the crowd. You were better off when I was in charge. Prices were lower. Jobs were up. The world respected us. You had money in your pocket. That's what people care about. Not speeches, not emotions. Results. He paused for applause. Some came, but it wasn't the full wave he wanted. He kept going louder. Now people are tired of talk. They want someone who can win, who can bring back the deal, shut the border, protect your neighborhoods. I've done it before and I'll do it again. It was classic Trump. Fast, bold, and full of punchlines. He ended with a smirk, confident. He had just landed a clean blow. Then came Jasmine Crockett's response. And the moment everything changed. She didn't interrupt. She didn't raise her voice. She simply folded her hands and said, You're right. People are tired, but not just of talk. They're tired of being lied to. The room froze. The words hung in the air like smoke. You. Keep saying they were better off under you, she continued. But let's talk about that working-class family. Maybe they lived in Texas, where I'm from. Maybe they worked 2 jobs, still couldn't afford health insurance, and had to choose between medicine and groceries. Trump scoffed under his breath but didn't speak. Crockett leaned in. Maybe their rent went up. Maybe their local school lost funding. Maybe their cousin got laid off when a factory closed. Despite all those promises you made about saving American jobs. She didn't blink. And when they looked for help, they didn't find a president. They found a man on a golf course tweeting insults. A quiet murmur swept through the crowd. It wasn't loud, but it was sharp. Trump's face tightened. The charm was gone. The smirk disappeared. He tried to cut in. "That's fake." But Crockett didn't let him. "No, sir," she said. "This isn't fake. This is what I hear in living rooms across the country. Not at fundraisers, not at country clubs, on front porches, in churches, in clinics. I don't need a private jet to understand their pain. I've lived it." She wasn't just debating anymore. She was testifying. "And you know what? Those families want," she continued, "they want truth. They want someone who doesn't just remember them during elections. They want clean water, safe streets, fair pay, and dignity. They want a president who sees them, not just his own reflection." That sentence cut deep. Trump, usually quick to jab back, said nothing. He shifted in his seat. His hand twitched toward his water bottle, then stopped. It wasn't that he was silenced. It was that he was stunned. For the first time on stage, he looked like he wanted the moment to end. Crockett finished her response with a slow, steady voice. "I don't have all the answers, but I'll never pretend I'm the only one who matters, because when you're elected to lead, it's not about your name, your brand, or your revenge. It's about service." And with that, she leaned back. The silence was long, uncomfortable. Not even the moderator moved. It was the moment Trump realized this wasn't just a bad night. It was a mistake. He had thrown out a challenge thinking it would be entertainment, a victory lap, a spotlight he could control. But instead, he had invited someone to the table who wasn't there to play. Jasmine Crockett didn't just outtalk him. She outgrounded him, outfelt him, and outconnected with the very people he claimed to represent. And now all he could do was sit there and regret it. The air in the room had changed. You could feel it thick with tension, heavy with realization. The audience, once lively and reactive, now sat in silence, absorbing what they had just witnessed. Donald Trump, usually untouchable in moments like this, seemed human, slower, less sure of himself. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett remained calm, poised, and unshaken, and there was still one question left. The moderator, slightly more cautious now, glanced between the two before reading the final prompt. "What do you want the American people to remember about you after tonight?" It wasn't a question about policies, polls, or performances. It was personal. And final, Trump leaned into the mic, his voice noticeably lower than before. "I want the American people to remember that I fought." He said, "I took on everyone, the establishment, the media, the deep state, because I care about this country. I didn't need to run. I had everything. But I did it anyway because I love America." He paused and looked directly at the camera. "I made America strong. I made it respected. And I'll do it again." There was no applause this time, just silence. He sat back, his expression tight. He had said what he wanted, but even he seemed unsure if it had landed. Then it was Crockett's turn. She didn't hesitate. "I want the American people to remember that I listened," she began. "That I didn't come here to talk about myself, but to speak for those who never get a microphone." Her voice, though soft, filled the entire space. "I didn't grow up with power. I wasn't born into wealth. I've been broke. I've been underestimated. I've had doors slammed in my face. But I kept going, because I knew that somewhere someone was waiting for someone like me to stand up for them." She looked out across the audience row by row like she was seeing every single face. "I don't promise that everything will be easy. I don't promise to be perfect, but I do promise this. I will never forget who I'm fighting for. I will never put my name above the people. And I will never back down from doing what's right." Her voice didn't shake. It didn't rise, but it carried weight. And when the cameras turn off, she continued, "When the lights dim and the spin begins, I want you to remember this. There's a difference between a performer and a public servant. One lives for applause. The other lives for accountability." That last line hit hard, not just because of who was sitting across from her, but because everyone watching knew exactly what she meant. She gave a small nod to the moderator. "That's all," she said. Trump didn't respond. He didn't try to interrupt. He didn't lean in. He simply sat there, hands clasped, lips pressed together. For once, he didn't have the last word. The moderator, clearly aware of the gravity of what had just happened, took a deep breath before thanking both candidates. The stage lights dimmed. The mics went cold. And the moment, though over, stayed with everyone in that room. People got up slowly, not in a rush to beat traffic, but as if they were leaving a courtroom after a final verdict. Because that's what it felt like, a trial of leadership, character, and purpose. And the outcome? Donald Trump had shown what he always shows: confidence, defiance, and boldness. But Jasmine Crockett had done something more. She had revealed truth, not the kind you measure with numbers, but the kind that comes from lived struggle, from showing up for meaning every word you say. As the stage emptied and the night drew to a close, one thought hung in the air like a whisper. He challenged her, and he never saw her coming.